those who do not know him yet, Professor Giovanni Marin. Professor Giovanni Marin is Professor of Applied Economics at the Department of Economic, Society and Politics at the University of Urbino here in Italy. And he's also a research affiliate of an important research institute, with Sustainability, Environment, Economics and Dynamic Studies based in Ferrara, SEEDS. And is also associate editor of Environmental Development and Sustainability. Before joining the University of Urbino, Giovanni has been a postdoctoral researcher at the IR-CRES CNR of Italy, where he had the opportunity to meet and work with some of us, with Marco and Alberto in particular, and he's also been postdoctoral researcher at Sciences Po in France. Yes, his main research interests are, I would say, in the field of environmental economics, with a special focus on environmental innovation, on skills and tasks of the labor force still in the green domain. He's also working in economics of natural disaster and the extended environmental use of input-output analysis. Roughly, these are the main research topics on which he is working. You might easily see from his CV that on these topics he has a terrific record of publications. Giovanni is one of the most productive persons I've ever met in my life. And he's also a colleague who is really nice and funny to co-author and work with. Having said that, let me briefly remind you also the rules of the game. So we're going to start with 1 hour of presentation by Giovanni. So Giovanni, you have 1 hour time maximum. Okay, you can also finish before if you want, but I'm going to remind you when you have 5 minutes to go in case you got proxy to 1 hour. We're going to record the presentation. So if there's some here in the room that doesn't like to be recorded, I kindly invite him or her to leave the room and follow the webinar on YouTube, where we are broadcasting the webinar. During the presentation by Giovanni, if someone has got questions, providing their spotlight question, brief question, they can be inserted in the chat or in the Q&A bottom. And then after the presentation by Giovanni, we're going to have a more structural discussion among us, collecting questions and waiting replies from Giovanni. Okay. I think that I've said all the things I should have said, so I don't want to steal further time to the presenter. Giovanni, thanks a lot for having accepted our invitation to join the webinar series, and the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sandro, for the very kind words and for the invitation. And thank you all for being here for this seminar. I'm presenting a joint work with 3 other co-authors. One is Ziqiao Chen from the Syracuse University, David Pope again from Syracuse University and MBR, and Francisco Bona from Sciences Po. Okay, sorry, Alberto, you just saw exactly the same presentation a few weeks ago, but hopefully we will take it from a different perspective. This work began a bit earlier than the COVID crisis, so any reference to it came by chance. And the implication of this work are quite relevant, but were not expected to be relevant for this situation in which we are currently living. And more specifically, the aim of the paper is to investigate and analyze the labor market consequences of a huge fiscal push that occurred in the United States after the Great Recession of 2008, and the peculiar nature of that big fiscal push, both in terms of spending and in terms of tax cuts, was that a large part of it was devoted to environmental projects. I think it is the first big experiment that happened in the recent decades. And our idea was that it was very useful to understand what would happen as a consequence of this kind of environmental policy, mostly in terms of subsidy, rather than what has happened and happened in the past when considering different kinds of environmental policies, that is taxes on pollution or common control regulation. So most of the literature looking at the labor market impact of environmental policies considers sort of stick policies, while we are looking at the carrot, okay, to see whether there are differences. Also, as in the past, considered the sticks. So in a previous paper with Francesco, David, and also Davide Consoli, we were looking at a similar such question, but from a different perspective, by looking at regulation of local pollution in US counties, the Clean Air Act. In this case, which was imposing costs on polluting companies, here we are looking at a series of subsidy to the green economy. We were also recently mentioned by a very interesting article by the New York Times. Our colleague David Popp was interviewed by the journalist, and the idea was that the new US administration wants to go back to the Obama times in terms of investing in the green economy, or even more so, actually. So they were looking for analysis that were providing evidence about the labor market impact of this kind of analysis. And our results were fitting quite a lot with this demand from the policymakers. So even though our results, we will see, are not, how to say, the best ones we could expect from this kind of policies. But they should be put in a quite broad perspective, so we don't find a strong positive and no cost effect, obviously. So the objective is to focus on the green part of the American Recovery and Investment Act spending that was decided and implemented starting from year 2009 on the employment of local labor markets in the United States, that is commuting zones, over a quite a long time span, so from 2009 till 2017. We do not only look at total employment, we also consider many different potential categories of workers, whether those categories were the winners or the loser of this kind of spending. So we focus both on the availability ex ante before the policy of the relevant skills in the labor force that could ease the job creation potential and enable the job creation potential of this kind of stimulus. And at the same time, we also considered different categories of workers as possible winners or losers. So we will see that, for example, manual workers, blue collars, are the ones that gained the most from this kind of spending. And also most of the jobs that were created by this spending were in the construction sector. Okay. Outline is always a useless slide. So policy relevance. It is relevant for the US because the new administration wants really to push on the environmental component of the development path, but also is relevant as an informative result for the European strategies. Again, this work started also before the Green Deal. In Europe, the approval of the Green Deal by the new Commission was the presentation was in December 2019. We were working on it a bit earlier, so it came out to be relevant because the new Green Deal, the European Green Deal wants to steer the European economy and industry towards a sustainable path, and also by creating jobs thanks to this steering. Okay, and on the top of it, the next generation EU is further reinforcing this directionality. Our results point to a job creation effect, which is not large, or at least not larger than other types of spending, and more importantly, it tends to emerge in the longer run. So even while if we look at long-term strategies for development, this kind of spending could be useful and effective, it could not be useful to recover from a very a huge and short-term crisis like the one which we're living. Our results also point to the importance of possessing the relevant skills to really take advantage in terms of job creation from this kind of interventions. More specifically, we have that in the commuting zones where the labor force added the right set of skills, and I will be more precise about the word right in a while. They also were the ones that gained the most in terms of job creation. In the literature, we have there is plenty of evidence about the negative impact of environmental policies on total employment, even though this negative impact is usually significant, but usually very small and concentrated in very specific sectors. So there are a lot of very nice papers, Kahneman, Sur, and others that find the negative impact of stick style, let's say, environmental policy, but those negative impacts are very small. And usually, the economic cost of those negative employment impact is more than compensated by orders of magnitude by the environmental benefits, the monetary value of environmental benefits. The policy, so we are considering the American Recovery and Investment Act that comes right after the new administration, when the new administration took office in 2009 and was approved in February 2009. Right after the Great Recession. So we have that the GDP in the US between, I also have a figure here. Where is the figure? Here. There is to be a figure. You see the drop in GDP from 2007 afterwards until the bottom of the second quarter of 2009. And this collapse as a consequence of the financial crisis was counteracted by a huge stimulus from the federal government in the US. The stimulus amounted to about $800 billion, that is 5% of US GDP, more or less. So it is used in macroeconomic terms. And the objective was specifically to create jobs. So there was huge unemployment. In the short run, there was need to create new jobs to solve the unemployment problem. Spending was very much heterogeneous across different, we will call them in Europe, ministries. In the US, we have departments and agencies. And given that at the federal level, the allocation to different departments was not proportional to the pre-ARRA spending, we also have that the spending was pretty much heterogeneous also across different locations. I will be clear on that in a while. So this is the distribution of spending. We just take out from it the direct unemployment benefits that was allocated to the Department of Labor. But the total allocation of spending is in this figure. And as you see, we have that, for example, 18% Department of Transportation, mostly in terms of infrastructural investment, highway, freeways, high-speed railways, etc. While we can see that 16 plus 3%, that is 19%, went to two departments that would take our attention as we are invested in environmental spending, and 3% to the Environmental Protection Agency, although most of it is for restoration activities and cleaning activities, and 16% of the total to the Department of Energy. We checked carefully most of the projects, and we knew it from gray literature, but we also checked it manually. Basically, all the projects from the Department of Energy accrue to environmental aims. So they are aimed for deployment of renewable energy, for energy efficiency in building and in industry. Even though the normal spending of the Department of Energy is a bit more heterogeneous. So we checked that all of it is green in a way. Even though the Department of Energy in general is spending also for fossil fuels, it is giving tax cut for fossil fuels, it is providing resources for nuclear projects, for something in between energy and defense. But all the additional spending was green. So we focus on the spending by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy. Allocation. one, you are interested in estimating an effect. We are trying to be cautious, even though we'll probably not, we're not able to succeed it perfectly. Still, the idea is that there could be self-selection of areas for spending. So on the one hand, we have the direct spending for unemployment benefits, for example, was strongly correlated on purpose with the unemployment level of different areas. So the areas that were experiencing higher unemployment rates got a large amount of direct spending in terms of unemployment benefits. But that was not exactly the same for other types of spending. Actually, most of the allocation rules of federal spending to different locations was based on pre-existing formulas. So there are statutory formulas in the US to allocate spending to areas, and given that it was an emergency spending to recover from a big recession, there was basically no time to study which were the most effective way of allocating funds, and funding was given based on past formulas. So we have that, for example, the formulas are correlated to the number of highways for the spending from the Department of Energy, the population density for other types of spending, etc. So we have that in a way, spending for each department was exogenously allocated to different areas. Clearly, different areas, based on their characteristics, were getting more or less spending from different departments, and we try to control it. But still, the location, due to the emergency type of spending, was not very easy. Was quite hard for states and commuting zone to manipulate the location rule. Due to the size of the stimulus, of the overall stimulus, clearly there were many papers right after the stimulus was approved that aimed at estimating its effectiveness in reaching its goals, that is creating jobs. We have many papers, so the review I will show you here is not comprehensive. One of the most important ones is the paper by Wilson on the American Economic Journal of Economic Policy, that using just cross-sectional variation across states, across the 50 US states, they find that for each additional job that was created, the federal spending was about $125,000. Okay, so other papers also find very similar results. For example, Feirer and Sacerdote find that each job costed about 100,000. Duport and Meccari, European Economic Review, 100,000. Duport and McCroy, Economic Journal, they find 100,000 again. But they also find some spillover effect for neighboring regions in terms of increased wages. Garin is one of the few papers on the Journal of Urban Economics that focuses on spending of a specific type, in this case, spending from the Department of Transportation for infrastructure-related projects. First of all, they point to the fact that most of the spending was allocated to projects that were already in a very advanced phase of development, what they call shovel-ready projects. So there was no time to invent new projects and develop new projects. Spending was allocated to projects that were ongoing or ready to start. And so there was no target for this specific spending to areas with higher or lower unemployment. And he finds an increase in 30% in terms of total wages paid. And the idea of all those papers is to focus basically on local multipliers. So in some case, there is an attempt to distinguish between the direct effect, that is jobs created by companies receiving the grants, and jobs created by sub-recipients or by suppliers. So there is very little effort to distinguish between the two types. We are also not very much able to do it, but still the general idea is that there are local multipliers. So what is the expected effect of this kind of spending in general, not the environmental type, any kind of huge fiscal stimulus at the local level. First of all, we have that in the targeted sectors, so the sectors that receive directly the grants, we will expect an increase in the labor demand, so in total labor, if there is some unemployment or if there is some shift from other sectors. So we have that, given that labor is immobile in the short run, we will have either an increase in labor market participation, people who was out of the labor force that will enter the labor force and we start working, or a decrease in unemployment. And this generates an increase in total employment of the area. At the same time, however, there could be some crowding out effect, that is employment in non-targeted sector that moves to the targeted sector, because there are the rents, there is an increased demand of specific competencies that are not in the people that is out of the labor force or is unemployed, and so this creates a decrease in labor in other sectors, and could also create negative externalities in terms of higher cost of labor for other sectors. And finally, we also have the indirect effects, what is probably more related to local multipliers. That is, this additional spending will create the demand for additional local products and services, both from the companies that will through input-output linkages, but also by people who found a job and start spending locally. Okay, so this is the synthesis of the expected impact. So we are not able to distinguish between across the different types of effects. As we focus on green spending, the first issue that came to our mind at the time was to see whether there was a match between the type of spending, the color of the spending, and the type of jobs that were created. That is, jobs in the so-called green jobs. There are many definitions of it. We focus on the definition that we have already used in the past. That is the definition based on the tasks performed by worker on the job. So we have that green jobs could be defined by the industry or by surveys. In our case, we consider green jobs the jobs where the workers in a specific occupation do some tasks that is directly related to environmental objectives. So we use existing classification of green occupations by the others in the occupational network information in the US. More or less, the green jobs in the US amount to about 3–4% of the total employment, so it is a small portion. And we will focus on this kind of workers. At least one of the focus will be on green jobs. Let me skip this. Green jobs are defined in a continuous way. So there are jobs that are fully green. For example, we may say that environmental engineers only perform environmental tasks. So all their set of tasks has to do with environmental objectives. So there are, however, occupations where just a small portion, a small share of tasks has to do with environmental objectives, while other tasks have nothing to do with environmental objectives. So here you see a list of occupations in the last two columns where the share of tasks devoted to green objective is smaller than 100%. In this case, we consider those jobs just partially green. And how partially green, how much partially green? By using the share of green tasks over total tasks. So if we assume that each task reported in the net database is performed using a certain amount of time, we may say that this share is a proxy for the share of time devoted to green tasks of different occupations. So it will be a continuous mention. However, green jobs are the ones directly using the skills required to perform green tasks. To have a broader measure of the potential of the labor force to be employed in green tasks, in a previous paper we defined a set of skills that are relevant for performing green tasks. So we may have workers that are doing jobs that have nothing to do with the environment, not even one green task, but their set of skill could be useful for performing green tasks. I don't know, many engineering occupations have nothing to do with the environment, but potentially they could use their skill and their expertise for environmental tasks. So we ended up defining this set of green skills that span over more technical skills, that is engineering and technical skills, including some manual skills like drafting, laying out, and specifying technical devices. We have scientific skills, we have operation management skills, and we have monitoring skills. There are also many skills that are not green. So this list may seem to include everything, any kind of skills. It is not. Usually you have in the backup slide a list of what is not green skill. If you're interested, I can go through that later. And our idea is to use this measure, this metrics, to say, okay, there is a large share of the labor force which is not employed in green jobs. A green fiscal stimulus should create an increased demand for green tasks. Workers which have the appropriate skills for performing green tasks could be employed in green jobs, okay? Even though they were not employed in green jobs before. So let me move to the list of research questions, which is pretty trivial to say. So the first one is really to look at the total labor market impacts of the green part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Second, the first question to see whether the pre-policy availability of green skills was a relevant mediating factor. Third, no, this was the third question. The second question, whether there is a differential effect on different categories of workers, including the workers that perform green tasks. Data, we use many data sources. So I basically broke a laptop by building some of the database, unfortunately. One, the most important one is green spending that comes from official data on American Recovery and Investment Act. There used to be a very nice website, the recovery.gov, that was discontinued during the Trump administration. So data was previously retrieved by services in the US and is available from the NDR repository. And in that data, we have information about every single project within the American Recovery and Investment Act. I don't remember the number, there are several thousand. Then we allocate spending to different places based on the place of performance. So not where the principal awardee is located, but where the prime and subprime recipients are located. Because we have a two-step allocation, we have that most of the spending was first allocated to states, and in the data you see as first recipient someone living in the state capital. So in California, you see a lot of spending given to Sacramento, which doesn't make much sense. But then we also have information about sub-recipients, so where the money went from the capital to different counties. And data were broken down by department and by or agency. We allocated data to the whole set of US commuting zones that are group of counties based on commuting patterns. We use a definition by the official definition of the US Census, also used in other papers. And like in Dupori and Mekari, we focus on large commuting zones. So we eliminate a bit of noise, even though it is not very much relevant, because we focus on commuting zones with more than 25,000 residents. This account for 99% of the population, basically. Those areas are really small in the middle of nowhere. Even if we include them, even that we have weighted regressions, we don't get any difference. Actually, I don't know why in the end they decided to keep them out. It was just to have a bit more clear descriptive one. And we also decided to exclude one large commuting zone, that is New Orleans, because we're struggling a lot with the presence of outliers. Then we really decided to go to the raw data. We realized that because of the Katrina hurricane, data are completely crazy in New Orleans. So there is a huge drop in population, in employment, in everything. I don't remember the year, I think it was 2012. 11. Green ARRA definition. So as I told you, we focus on spending from the Department of Energy and the Environment Protection Agency, about 1/5 of the total spending. Here I report two different projects, one from the Department of Energy, that is the so-called the Solana project. It is one of the largest projects. It amounts to $1.36 billion. And this is a huge solar power plant. Not photovoltaic, but it is thermic solar. This is located in Arizona, and it consists in creating this 250 megawatt plant of solar energy. And the idea of the project was to create about 1,700 jobs in the construction phase, so in the short run, and 60 permanent jobs. So this is the official description of the project. While another project we selected as an example is the one of the Environment Protection Agency, also one of the biggest, that is $433 million in the state of New York, and this was to build and upgrade wastewater treatment facilities in the state. First, descriptive analysis. So our aim is to focus on green spending. So we clearly have to control for the presence also of other type of spending. Actually, other type of spending is 4 times larger than green spending. But we decided to do it in the most flexible way possible. So we will not be able to really identify the impact of other spending, but we will control for it in a very flexible way. But as a first step, it was interesting to see that the spending from the Department of Energy and the EPA was not very much correlated across areas with the spending of other agencies and departments. So the simple cross-sectional correlation of spending per capita between green and non-green ARRA is just 0.34, basically. You see very weak correlation, quite weak correlation. So the two dimensions are not independent, clearly, the two variables, the two types of spending, but still they are not exactly overlapping.
Sorry, Giovanni, in the previous figure, this is per capita spending or per community zone spending?
Per capita.
It's per capita.
It is per capita term, yes. Other data, for total employment and employment by industry, we use the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the quarterly census of employment and wages. When we focus on occupational data by employment by occupation, we cannot use data from the BLS because they use a very different and much aggregated, for our purposes, geographical areas. So, and there is a discontinuity in 2014, unfortunately. So we use the micro data from the American Community Survey, which covers 1% of the US population, aggregated up at the commuting zone level. And from this data, that are individual level data, we could also get information about wage of the person, about income, about the occupation, about age and other characteristics. We get information about the occupational level intensity of skills from the ONET database, and the coverage for our labor market outcome variables is 2005-2017. Actually, unfortunately, we could not go further back in the past for all our data, at least. And the main constraint is the American Community Survey, which is available with the appropriate geographical detail just from 2005. Well, but for some analysis, we also go back to the year 2000 just for some check about prevalence, for example. So this is the distribution. In the top left, you see the distribution by commuting zone of non-green spending per capita. And so we don't see very much polarization of spending. We may say that there is a bit more spending per capita in the Middle East, Middle West, Middle East, but there is where no one lives, basically. You also have seen from the US election that the central area was fully red, but doesn't count much. And when we look at the share of green spending, we don't see clear concentration of green spending. Maybe here in Arizona, in California, but not extremely dense at least. If you start comparing spending with some very simple measure of labor market outcome, that is the change in employment, the relative change in employment compared to the base year 2008, that is the first year before the policy, what we see, that focus in the second and third panel, is that there is a very weak and positive correlation between green spending per capita on the x-axis and employment growth in the y-axis. So the correlation is 0.07 in 2000. If you look at the growth rate in 2008-2012, a bit stronger if you look at longer term growth rate in employment. But if you look at the first panel, we also see a very weak and positive correlation between the spending that occurred in 2009-2012 and the pre-policy employment trend. That is the trend in employment 2005-2008. Keep in mind this because that will be relevant for our empirical analysis, the presence of pre-trends. If you look at non-green spending per capita, so whatever was spent by other departments, we do see a bit stronger correlation for short-term employment growth. Here in the second panel, 0.14, it was 0.07 for green spending. But very interestingly, we see a negative correlation in the longer run, even though it is very weak and small. Okay, so if we were I don't know, very, very simple unconditional correlation may tell us green employment, green spending tends to be correlated with longer term employment growth, not with short term, while other spending was effective in the short term, but not in the long term. And actually, this is the first result is more or less what we find with a more, say, elegant econometric analysis. So our baseline specification is what you see here in this slide. So we estimate change in the labor market impact, labor market outcome between a specific year that spans from 2005 to 2017 and the base year, which is 2008. So we are basically estimating static differences in the dependent variable. And our main explanatory variable is the total green spending per capita. This is a time invariant variable because it is very hard to estimate the time profile of the spending. There were delays, there were spending spans over a 3-4 year period, but also extended afterwards. So we decided not to focus on very short-term effect. And we have a number of controls that are including the regression in a quite flexible way. That is, we use controls measured in the pre-treatment period, measured in 2005, basically, and interact them with a series of time dummies. So we allow the trend in the labor market outcome to be different in a flexible way, given the initial characteristic of the area. We have plenty of controls, I will go through them in a while, but I want to focus on this control, mu, which is a series of dummy variables for quantiles, 20 quantiles, big quantiles, of non-green spending per capita. So we allow the effect of green spending to be basically non-parametric. And we interact those with, interact those with the year dummies. So we allow areas belonging to different digitiles of non-green spending per capita to have completely independent trends in the labor market outcomes. And we also account for period-specific state dummies, or in some robustness set also for division dummies, that is, divisions are groups of states. So in the paper, we spend a lot of time in discussing the difference between state and division dummies. I think it is a bit too technical for presentation, but if you are interested, go to that. So estimation issues, plenty of it in terms of potential source of endogeneity. The first source of endogeneity is that you could expect that spending went where it was most required, so where the labor market outcomes during the crisis were the worst ones. So we may have some sort of self-selection. And this gives rise to a non-random assignment. So we have that the assignment was either correlated with the outcome of the labor market during the crisis, and this is particularly relevant, however, we have seen for the spending from the Department of Labor, less for other departments, but also given the way through which spending was allocated, that is statutory formulas, we have that the allocation of spending was correlated to structural characteristics of the era. We may also be correlated at the same time with the long-term trend in labor market outcomes. For this reason, we account for a number of observables. So we account for the sectoral composition of the era, share of manufacturing employment, share of construction employment, share of public sector employment. I don't remember all of them; they are in the table. The level and the pre-treatment trend, so the trend between 2005 and 2007 of the structural characteristics, the structural composition of the era. We account for the presence of Federal Research and Development Laboratory, which got large funding from the ARRA spending, especially the green one, and we account for the availability of green skills prior to the introduction of the policy. The second important estimation issue is the presence of pre-trends. We will see now in the next slide, probably in 2 slides, that there is a correlation between green spending per capita in 2009-2012 and the trend in employment, in labor market outcomes between 2005 and 2008. So there was a correlation between the existing long-term trend in employment and the allocation of green spending to areas. And this can create troubles because it is hard to see whether the estimated impact of green spending in our case was additional to the pre-existing trend that was correlated with green spending. So how to deal with that? We can't, controlling for observable is not enough to partial out, to remove these pre-trends. And we need to remove the presence of pre-trends. So we have just to focus on the additional impact given the existence of pre-trend. So I said more or less everything about the controls. Yes, let me just focus on the bottom part of the table to see if we've got some important controls. Yeah, we control for import penetration, we control for income per capita, I think. We control for the potential use of renewable energy given the geographical characteristics of the area, etc., etc. So the prevalence of winds, the slope of mountains to use solar panels, the amount of lighting given the shade of the lamps, everything. Okay? This is the distribution of green spending for quintile of non-green spending. So let me focus to the left part. We have that areas that got a lot of non-green spending tend to get also a lot of green spending, the lighted gray bar, but not that much. So we have that distribution of green spending is more or less, not extremely skewed, but more or less homogeneous across different quintile of non-green spending. And this is also, in a way, confirms the weak correlation between the 2 measures. So pre-trends, here you see different regression where the dependent variable is first panel total employment, then we have green employment and manual labor employment. Let me focus on total employment. There you see that there is actually no cross-sectional correlation. We control just here for the quintiles of green spending between green spending per capita and employment growth before the policy. So there seem to be no unconditional pre-trend. But when we include our set of controls, our favorite specification, conditional controls, there is some correlation between green spending and pre-treatment trend in labor market outcomes. So in a way, we will need to partial out this existing pre-trend. So we explicitly account and test for the presence of pre-existing trend. If there is a significant pre-existing trend, in our estimated post-treatment effect will be will take out from it the correlation with the pre-existing of the green value. It may seem confusing. It will be clearer when we focus on a specific result. So let me focus on our main result. The dependent variable in the first column is total employment. As you see, we have that this red rectangle highlights that green spending created 11 jobs per $1 million before it was spent. So it doesn't make any sense, or at least this points to self-selection of areas. So there was a pre-trend. The short-run effect was very similar, 11 jobs, and the long-run effect was larger, 20 jobs per $1 million. So basically what we do is to take the difference between short-run effect and pre-trend, policy effect to estimate the net additional effect of the policy. And for total employment, the net additional effect is 0 in the short run and not significant. It is about 9 jobs per $1 million in the longer run, but not significantly different from 0. So it is very unprecisely estimated. When, however, for example, for green employment, we were not finding any pre-trend, so there was no job creation before the policy, which is impossible, obviously. So there was no pre-trend. We do not need to take out the pre-trend, and we just consider the effect which is already additional. So what we find is that $1 million of green spending creates about 2.66 jobs in the green employment, and interestingly, more than 11 jobs in the long run in manual occupations. Okay. So as you can see, there is very weak and small job creation effect in the short run. That's significant, but small for manual occupation, and stronger and larger job creation effect in the longer run. That is about 7 to 8 years after the spending, especially so in manual occupations. Just to give you, just to position our result in the rest of the literature, this 9 jobs per $1 million, even though it is not significant, lies in the range of job creation effect of general ARRA spending, so green and non-green, found in other papers. So if you remember the papers by Wilson, by McCroy, etc., we're finding a very similar result. If you look at the time profile, let me focus on the bottom part of green spending, of the impact of green spending on total employment, we really see an acceleration in the longer run. Okay, so this kind of spending is effective. It takes time to take place. Why is that? We tried to find strong or anecdotal evidence about this delayed effect of green spending compared to non-green spending. One possibility is that this long-term job creation effect is due not directly to the federal spending that generate additional jobs, but by the fact that public federal spending also crowded in private investments. So there is this paper like an addictor that points to this crowding in effect. So many private companies invested because the government was investing in green spending, in green projects. So. Second, possible motivation is related to the specificities of green spending and specificities of green ARRA. That is the fact that at the beginning, first there were unclear guidelines about how to spend money for these projects. Second, environmental projects were not always easy to administer compared to other projects like infrastructural investments. First of all, there were many bureaucratic steps to be taken. So we're talking about the bureaucracy. The US is not free of bureaucracy. Second, by American requirements. So there was the requirement to buy a certain amount of intermediate products financed by federal grants, products that were produced in the US, so protectionist measure, And in the field of environmental spending, especially so for renewable energy, there was no local production. So at that time already, China was the world leader in terms of manufacturing of solar panels, for example, and other countries, including China, but also Europe were the leaders in the production of wind turbines. So there was a shortage in the US of products that were crucial for the deployment of the projects. And also, there was not enough staff with the appropriate skills to be hired to carry out the projects. We can't control for many and check for many of those, for basically none of those except for the last one. So we may see whether areas with a higher endowment of green skills, so people that could be employed in these kind of projects, were the good ones, the best ones to take advantage of this kind of spending. So we interact green spending in our regression with the availability of green skills in 2005, so before the spending, and we see that the effect in the long, let us focus on this figure here, the differential effect is positive for areas with a lot of green skills on the x-axis. So areas with more, that were endowed with more green skills were the ones that could take advantage of green spending in terms of job creation. So shortage of skills, according to our results, was a constraint for many areas, both in the short and in the long run. You see also, we find significant effect also in the short run in this case, in some specification. And the paper you find around is terminates more or less here. So let me I will go back to that later. So let me conclude this robustness check. We carried out many robustness check. We excluded 2009, which was the year with that was the bottom of the crisis. We excluded areas that got a lot or very little non-green spending. We excluded areas hosting R&D labs because there the transmission mechanism from spending to job creation is a bit more indirect. We excluded areas, we re-included area with residents, so many robustness checks as you see here, and all of them point to the same result. That is, the results are very robust with those different checks, with one exception, which was not the real robustness check, it was an attempt. So in the beginning, we were hoping to be able to find a good instrument for our variable, and the instrument that came to our mind was a simple shift share instrument that is given that the location of federal spending to different commuting zones was based on rigid and time invariant pre-existing formulas. We wanted to use federal spending by department for each commuting zone before the ARRA as a way to see what would have been the spending given the composition of spending by department before the introduction of the policy. So we took data, and this is what burned my computer, laptop, from spending from 2001 to 2005 by area. But we realized that those data were completely useless to our purpose, and we ended up with an instrument that was extremely weak. Results were completely not credible. Why? Because those data do not distinguish between prime recipients and ultimate recipients of the funding. So in that case, most of the spending, a lot, quite almost everything, was allocated in our data to state capitals, and we were really not able to do anything better. So it was a pity. Just to conclude, results by sectors, we find an effect that is significant in the long run on the construction sector, but while we do not find many other heterogeneity. So we don't find any additional effect for manufacturing or for supporting services. When we focus on the results by occupation, we find a strong effect on manual occupations that was already available in the main table. Not any additional different effect on other occupational groups. So the manual workers were the ones that gained the most from this policy. And this could have many different interpretations in terms of policy implications. Manual workers are the ones getting the second lowest salary across those occupations in the list. So just service occupation get lower salaries. So they are middle low wage occupations. And this, on the one hand, points to the fact that the jobs created by fiscal stimulus are not very good jobs in a way. But on the other hand, are jobs that could be carried out by people with middle low skills in terms of level or in terms of specificities of the skills, and people who was very badly hit by the Great Recession. So it was effective to create long-term jobs for people who were the most hit by the Great Recession, and not only the Great Recession, also by globalization, by the implementation from China, by automation. So this category of workers is the most badly hit by many different structural shocks. And the fact that green spending is able to create an opportunity for them is probably a very positive policy implication of it. Then we also try to split the manual occupation in different types, but it is not very interesting. Very last slide. According to my clock, I have 30 seconds. Very last slide about more recent implication for the current situation. So this table and the next one come from a paper that is not available around yet. We are finalizing it. And we were focusing on the current crisis. So we have a crisis now in the US that especially in the spring and summer, also now in many states, hit very specific types of workers. Okay, so there are already many papers popping around identifying which is the kind of jobs that were badly hit by the Great Recession, by the COVID recession. And where is that? Okay, this category, low skilled occupation, at least because of COVID, those were identified based on their requirement to work in person, so impossibility to work from home, and the requirement to have face-to-face interaction. Those jobs are jobs that have that amount to about 1/3 of the US workers. There is no much gender bias in them. Their wages tended to be quite low, and they're not concentrated in specific areas. So their locational coefficient is low. Is there a possibility to re-employ those persons in the green economy? In terms of wage, it may seem to be difficult because they were earning low wages, and it is difficult not because they don't want to earn higher wages, but because the difference in wage reflects a difference in the skills required in different occupation. So in the top you see green occupations, the ones that gain the most from the spending. The problem is mostly from the constraint from re-employing those people in the green economy comes from the gender bias. So we have that while the share of male in occupation at risk because of COVID is slightly over 50%, green manual jobs are mostly male occupation now in the US. So there is a gender problem probably, and there is a skill problem. So the skills of workers in occupation that were destroyed by the COVID crisis are not adequate, so they have a huge skill distance from occupation in the green economy. Okay, and also they are less educated and less trained people. While for green occupation, there is a high requirement of training, more than 1 year specific training, and also education requirement is quite high, more than college, basically. So the idea is that to fill this gap, increasing the demand for green employment and green tasks through green spending is not enough, because the people that is available around to work, the unemployed people, are people with the set of skill which is not adequate for the green economy. So there is a huge and urgent need for also providing training for these people to be employed in the sectors that were pushed by the green spending. So this is our policy implication. If you want, just to summarize in a very trivial way, if you want to use the green lever to create jobs in the short and in the long run, it could work. But if this policy wants to be effective also in the short run, skills are crucial. The availability of skills is crucial. And in the current situation, the skills of the people that is looking for a job is not the set of skill which is needed by green spending. So in the short run, green spending could increase the wages for engineers, just to be very, or for solar installer, which have no university degrees, but will not increase the amount of people working with those occupations, because there is a constraint in terms of skills available. So training is crucial. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Also for having perfectly stick to time. Actually, you were excellent in doing that, and the presentation was also very, very interesting and a lot of food for thought. Now the issue is that some of us might have already heard this presentation in other settings and might already raise their comments somewhere else. Still, I do prize these people to reformulate their comments in this setting in order to feed the discussion. There's an important element of novelty with respect to previous webinars. We have rendered all GSSI people panelists, also and above all PhD students, which means that PhD students can intervene, pose questions without being previously rendered panelist or authorized by myself. So it's going to be smoother in terms of their participation to the webinar. And to start with, I would like to see precisely whether there's some PhD student who might want to ask some question. I mean, it doesn't need to be a technical question. It can be whatever, a curiosity on the topic, on its extension. So I will give, again, following what Alberto was inaugurated last time, this sort of routine of giving so priority to questions from PhD students. So is there any question from the floor of PhD students about the paper, and then I will open up discussion to the faculty or to other participants. I don't see raised hands yet.
I have one.
Oh, who is? Oh, there's Andrea. Andrea, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting, and also the data that you have. I was thinking for if you find difference at the regional level. I was thinking, for example, because you are engaged with the topic, so you are more likely to work on it, and maybe the law is more effective in the countries that have a higher environmental awareness. And in the same line, I was thinking if in the countries with more presence of natural resources, in some cases, people are more connected with nature and also more likely to protect it and more engaged with this topic. And also the universities maybe have some career that are specific, like for example, I don't know, environmental or marine engineer that are present in different countries. So maybe also this could affect the result. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, who is a PhD student of ours. Do you want to reply, Giovanni, or you want to take more questions? It's up to you.
No, I would like to reply because I think it is very easy, but also interesting. So about the last question, environmental programs by environmental degrees by universities, I think that would be really the first thing to do, because as we focus on the role played by training and availability of skills, this is crucial. We have something not on universities, but on training. Let me check the slide. It was one of the slides I skipped, this one. But I skipped it because it is very, very rough. That's why. And we have that areas that at the same time received spending from the federal level for training for green training were also the ones who took advantage, but in a very rough way, just correlations in terms of job creation of green spending. So going deeper on it is crucial, I think, and it is very useful. I would probably focus more on training than university programs, because we know that in the US there is very much mobility of students across states and locations. So I'm not sure whether the local availability of university in terms of labor market prospects of students is so important. It is important for the university to be a partner in developing projects, probably. That's crucial, not for students, probably. Regarding environmental awareness and natural resources, we didn't do anything on that. I think it is very interesting. There is, for example, some paper showing that areas with a lot of natural resources have a lower budget constraint at the state level. So the state governments can spend more because they can get rents from natural resources, and those states probably do not need federal spending to recover from a recession, or they are hit by a recession exactly because the price of the commodities in which they are endowed collapsed. So they deserve specific priority. While in terms of environmental awareness, it would be interesting to see also the reaction of the population, the proactivity of the population and labor force. If you have some variable in mind, it would be very useful. We did not think too much about that so far, but it would be very.
Right, thank you. Are you satisfied, Andrea, or do you want to hear more? You are?
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, so I know, I mean, we do have other PhD students that, like Andrea, are working on environmental stuff. I don't know whether they have curiosity. I mean, all the students of the first year.
There's a raised hand, Sandro.
Oh, there's a raised hand? I can't see it. Oh, Fernanda, oh, welcome. So Fernanda, welcome, good to see you. Fernanda, are you in L'Aquila, by the way? Just, yeah.
Yes, I arrived on Sunday.
Oh, yeah, it was very good job to bring you here. So Fernanda, welcome, and please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Sandro. Well, thank you for your presentation. Maybe this is a very dumb question, but I'm really curious. How do you determine the threshold between short run and long run? And the second, I was wondering, because you mentioned that the mechanism is very slow between like creating jobs. And I was wondering if there is like a certain mechanism there about this trade-off between another kind of jobs and the transition to these greener jobs. Like, for example, I know that the Midwest is full of jobs like focus on manufacture sector. So I don't know if there is like one kind of elasticity that doesn't allow to change from these kind of jobs to greener jobs. So there are two questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Fernanda. Giovanni, do you want to reply soon? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Fernanda. About short and long term threshold, it is more or less arbitrary. One motivation could be that direct spending and provision of grants ended in 2012, and this is the end of our short run. So basically, short run could be related to jobs created with money directly allocated to areas. So the money is given to workers in terms of wages. While from 2013 onwards, there are jobs that stand on their own legs. I don't know if you say that in English, but yeah, they don't stand on federal spending directly, on the ARRA's federal spending. They should stand on what the ARRA created. But still, it is arbitrary. That's why sometimes we also try to plot the more flexible time profile year by year. Second question, basically you were mentioning the specialization of specific areas in sectors or occupations or tasks, etc. This is exactly what we should look at. We try to look at in this additional paper, considering skill distances. So skill distances are used in labor economics as a proxy for the possibility to do a job-to-job transition. For example, the skill distance from our jobs and I don't know, singer is large, because we do not, most of us has no skills to be a singer probably, so the transition is impaired by this distance. Okay, so this is the variable probably to look at. We did not consider it explicitly in this paper, and not at least in a pairwise setting. This is something we would like to do. We were to deepen our understanding, looking at pairwise possibility of job-to-job transition.
Right. So while we wait for other questions, Giovanni, could I kindly ask you to go to the very first slide of your presentation, because we need to take a couple of pictures for our social networking. I forgot to take it at the beginning, so I'm going to take it right now. So there's a question from Francesca. Oh, good to see you, Francesca. Please go ahead. You should be entitled to do it.
Can you hear me well? Sometimes
Yes,
I
you
have
can. Ciao.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Giovanni. It was very interesting. I have a question. I'm not sure if you already talked about it, or maybe I missed it. So how do you explain the fact that the effect is mainly on manual occupation? Because I don't know, maybe there is the program itself, how it was structured, had some incentives towards manual occupation rather than to invest in physical capital. And if you checked a bit, because I expect a trade-off in general with between physical capital and technological innovation and the skill intensity of new jobs.
That's a very interesting question, because it is our main result basically. Manual jobs. If you look at the okay, we were not surprised, especially after we went through the specific projects. Now let me get to the project. Those projects were mostly projects for building something, basically. And our result on manual occupation is very much coherent with our result on construction sector. So in construction sector, not all manual occupations are in the construction sector, obviously, but still it points to the type of spending that was promoted. Spending that was towards infrastructural spending. For example, if you think at the Department of Energy projects, energy efficiency in buildings means insulation, basically. And if you think about renewable energy mostly means installation of capacity, not development of technology. Okay. So this is the reason why we find, I think, manual occupation being the ones that gain the most.
But if you're not wrong, you also find it when you exclude green energy, yes, green energy occupation. You also controlled for the two different kind of ARRA investments, ARRA occupations, and you also checked for non-energy related investment. Am I wrong?
It was not it was wait, because this is okay. Here we excluded loans. So loans were very important in very specific type of projects. I don't remember which ones, but in general they are a small share of total spending. So most of the spending was in terms of grants, so transfer of money from federal government to the local recipients. Loans were different because we do not know from the data how much the guarantee was covered. So loans cover a part of the spending. We don't know the details. So the idea was not to exclude energy, it was to exclude loans, basically. While when we exclude energy R&D, the idea was exactly to focus on the spending that was expected to create the most immediate labor market job creation effect, because research is useful for long-term development that creates usually few jobs directly.
Okay. Francesca, are you satisfied with that, Francesca?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Go. I see that there's also Adelia want to pose a question. Adelia, please go ahead. There's another PhD student, man. Very pleased that students are posing questions. Please go ahead with that. Adelia.
Hi, thank you very much. Sorry, it might be a very dumb question, and I probably missed it. Is there any difference like between the low skilled work, like this prime skilled worker, in like migrants or locals? This is the first part of the question. My second question.
Migrant or
locals.
Ah, okay, locals.
Yes, and I can explain why I was curious about that. And this is actually like the major part of my question. Is there any difference between the commuting zones which are closer to the coastal parts and the commuting zones which are in like with less access to the harbors and this kind of stuff? And the third question would be, so that all leads me to think about the distributional effects, and I was wondering if you were working on that as well. Sorry, they're probably dumb, but I'm curious.
Thanks. So in this paper, we do not differentiate between different geographical areas. Okay. So we do not take a truly geographic approach in a way that we do not focus on coast versus interior. But while I think it would be more interesting to focus on migrants versus local, in a way we have that migrants have an additional degree of freedom. They can, some of them would have thought, especially in the beginning of the crisis, to go back to their own country of origin, not at later stages, because if you think about migrants from Europe, then the recession hit Europe even in a worse way than in the US. So, but in the short run, that could be a possibility. While that was not a possibility for locals, this could be, for example, considered. Yes.
Right.
Well, now the distributional effect.
Yeah, that's the other question about distributional effect. Yeah.
That is something, at least in this table that is kept. We focused on the type of occupations that were the ones gaining the most, and decided to see whether within that occupational group, the high wage or low wage were the ones gaining the most. And we don't find much difference. We do find some a bit more higher job creation effect for manual workers that earn low wages. So in a way, we may, on the one hand, we may say that among employed people, we have an increase in the share of workers with low wage, which may point to an effect of increasing inequalities. But we always have to keep in mind that probably those people was not working before. So they got a job with a low salary, which was better than nothing. So the net effect in terms of inequality is not clear, but it is the net effect of these two opposite effects. Probably.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this story of distributional effects of policies is quite puzzling to me as well. Now, I've seen there a couple of questions from Ugo and Alberto as well. Alberto, Ugo, would you mind if I get the priority to Francesco Lelli, who is another student of ours, right? So please, sorry if I give priority to students and then we go back to ourselves, okay? Francesco Lelli, please go ahead, first year student.
Thank you for this priority. And thank you, Giovanni, for your interesting contribution. I have a question that is pretty based on the a possibility of a check in terms of turnover of firm inside green sector, because you are reasoning about a long period from 2008 for about other 10 years, and the green sector is really dynamic. So it's reasonable to think that there is a lot of turnover inside firms and a lot of turnover inside sector. So the conceptions of high skill and low skill are different in 2008 and 2018. And I would like to know if you're reasoning about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. About turnover, I would have liked probably to disentangle whether this application was more jobs in existing firms or new firms substituting the old ones or entering the market. Focusing on specific sector could be interesting. So if you have an intensive or extensive margin, it would be very interesting. You would also have some rough data to do that. So there is information about the number of establishments by sector, but we do not know whether a stable number is because no company entered or left the market, or because there was a substitution. So this impairs a bit an explicit analysis of that. But I think it is very interesting also for policy purposes. So to see whether this kind of stimulus can, in a way, save old companies, or could create the incentive to create new companies. Especially from our side of the ocean, we have a lot of emphasis from policymakers about saving companies no matter what, in a way, while in the other side, the approach is very different. And this is relevant to be very relevant. Regarding the definition of idle skills, this changes in time, even though I think especially for manual workers, it was not a period of extreme change. In a way, that was more important probably for workers in abstract occupations, where the digital revolution was massive. But still, this is a moving, it should be a moving definition. Actually, we almost never consider skills in terms of educational attainment, which is the usual way to consider skills. We always focus on the task content of occupations as a measure of skills.
Good. It's fine, Francesco. You want to?
Thank you.
Okay. Right. I do apologize with Ugo, Alberto, but I see that Takashi also raised his hand. So Takashi, please go with your question.
Sorry, Ugo.
You're more welcome. Go ahead.
Well, I just wondered, for curiosity, what you mean by green general skills mentioned in a few slides later, and how it's defined.
Yeah, so this was the result of a previous work we did. So it was based on a data-driven procedure, quite simple in terms of from a technical point of view. So we have the whole list of US occupations, that is about 800, 900. And we ran regressions where the main dependent variable was the intensity of different skills in the database. There are about 400 skills. And the main explanatory variable was the share of green tasks in the occupation. So we wanted to see whether there was a correlation between the occupation being intense in terms of green task and the occupation at the same time requiring a high intensity of a specific skill. This data-driven procedure, we also were accounting for the similarity of occupation, many different things, gave rise to the selection of these 14 items from Mononet, so 14 out of about 300-400. And I always have the jolly slide where I list what was not selected, because otherwise it may look like everything is a green skill, but all those skills, for example, were not selected. Is a selection, is a sample of the ones that were selected. Like programming was not a green skill. Okay, so green occupations are not intense in programming, are not intense in clerical, are not intense in psychology, etc., etc. So this was the procedure. I hope it was clear.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Giovanni, for that. So if there are no more questions from the PhD students, I would finally get the word. I think that Ugo actually asked to speak before than Alberto. So Ugo, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Sandro. And thanks, Giovanni, for your interesting presentation. I'm asking you in the debate. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we go. I lost you for 2 seconds. Yes.
Okay. In the debate that followed the Great Recession of the late 2000s, there have been economists, like I'm thinking of a paper that Either Glaser and Lawrence Summers and another author published in Brookings Institution. These economists that perhaps are more market-oriented economists compared to more Keynesian economists. Anyway, they think that rather than aiming at jobs creation, public policies, especially when it comes to address issues of regional convergence and so when public policies are intervening in economically depressed regions, they should aim more at, rather than jobs creation, they should aim more at, through fiscal tools, for instance, more at monetary subsidies, like income support, like they did in particular in this paper. They proposed a tax income credit, a tax credit, sorry, earned income tax credit, a ramped up earned income tax credit, which is basically a work incentive. So they are disillusioned about creating jobs in these economically depressed regions. And they say basically we should use fiscal policy in order to steer a kind of economic recovery. We should give money to people rather than creating jobs in economically destroyed regions. Okay, what do you think of this? Which is perhaps something that resonates also with debates in Italy about reddito di cittadinanza, the citizenship income, and on the other hand, more traditional approaches in which the state pursues economic development in depressed regions. Okay, is there this kind of dualism, or they can be even combined, or what is your opinion?
The obvious answer would be depends. Now I will give an answer. So now I think this is the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act also included tax credits. So there was part of it was based on removing tax, not creating jobs directly, and this was possible at least in the US. The US is a federal state, it's a federal country. So there are transfers across states, not aimed at creating jobs. This additional spending, however, was also meant to was meant to create jobs, but also to have some directionality in a way, in terms of the type of sectors and jobs that were to be promoted. For example, again, in the Department of Energy, there was no homogeneous increase in all transfer from the federal state to the single states, but there was a selection, there was a mandate to just spend for green projects in the energy. And so this kind of policy is aimed on the one hand to boost economic activity at the local level, so directly creating jobs, which according to I will also look at this paper, according to this view, is not probably the best way to do in the depressed areas, but at the same time we're also trying to convey a sort of industrial policy, that is, you should not use your money, the money that I give you for anything you like. I will give you directionality. So you should invest in infrastructure, in something that is specific in a way. Even though there was no planning at the top of specific projects, there was on the one hand urgency. So there was no possibility to have a whole program of spending, but also there was the idea to direct spending to specific objectives. Is this the best thing to do? I don't know. They try to take, no, Alberto, you should tell me, 2 birds with 1 stone, something like that. But because it was a unique occasion, and it was a unique case in history where the US could spend that amount of money in such a short time. So that was something that, and they tried to do everything in one shot. And this is what we are trying to do also now in Europe with the Recovery Fund. It is once in a generation spending, and we have urgency to spend it, but we also want to use it for a good purpose. We also at the same time want to solve the economic problems that are short-term problems. So it is a mess probably, especially when it is the kind of spending that is in emergency times.
Yeah, this is a broadish. I don't know whether Ugo wanna reply or.
Thank you.
Happy with that.
Thanks for the answer.
I think that the exportability of the results of your paper to Europe would deserve at least another hour of discussion, but which we don't have it. Alberto, please go ahead. I keep still for
no, that's fine. In fact, I'm going to try to steer the debate in that direction, if I may, although we have got only 30 minutes.
Sure.
But first of all, I would like to thank Giovanni and the PhD students for the lively debate so far. And Giovanni, I'm not changing institution in the future, so you can't chase me anymore, because Giovanni was the last seminar in SPRO and the second at the GSSI, so stop chasing me. I'm not going anywhere else. So next time it's going to be GSSI. Okay. No, I would like to build upon what Ugo was asking you, and I would like to stay a little bit like on the philosophical side of the story, if I may, in the sense that this is, the results that you show are basically telling us a story of non-neutrality on the skills, and I was wondering whether you see the space for a little bit of more social planning, like socialist style kind of policy, which can also like shape the structure of the projects that are funded so that they can have a certain impact on the skills. Because I think it relates to what you're saying, and you just said. But I just want to hear your opinion about that, whether you think it's feasible and whether you think that it may be feasible, in particular in Europe, where there's a little bit more taste for social planning than in the US, probably. And whether, in a sense, these type of Green Deal, in a sense, can be thought in conjunction with the other transition that we're facing. I'm entering this Sandro's field here when I'm talking about the twin transition, the green and the digital. Thinking about whether, in a sense, you think that it's feasible that this kind of Green Deal policies can, in a sense, induce effects on the employment that can counterbalance what's happening from the digitalization, automation. I don't know whether it makes sense at all, but if it does, I would like to hear from you. Or if it doesn't, say no, it doesn't. Cheers.
Okay, thank
ciao,
you.
Giovanni, by the way.
Thanks. Thank you. About the first issue, so social planning, not only, I think, in my view, not only is possible, but it is very much needed, because in this very large investments like the American Recovery Investment Act, the Green Deal, and also the new spending that will approve the US administration, the risk is always that there is a huge shift upwards in the demand for specific something that could be specific inputs, specific commodities, specific workers, which is not accompanied by an increase in the supply. And if the supply is very inelastic, very neoclassical point of view, the shift in demand just gives rents to people who's already getting rents. So it will not have an impact on the objective. So if you want to increase the installation of solar panels and there are no solar panels and you give subsidies, you just make the price of solar panel increase. It doesn't make much sense in the short run, at least. Maybe in the long run, this price increase may generate incentives for companies to set up solar panels or for new students to select fields that were demanded in the past because they are very high wage occupations. But this takes too much time, probably. So if you wait for the price signal to generate incentive for education, this will take a generation. This is not probably enough, and in my view, there is room for planning. But clearly, it is a hard job in the sense that we don't know which are going to be the crucial skills required in 5 years, probably. And I don't know you, but planning a radically new course of study is very risky and also very hard. But I think it is something where experts, not not us economists, probably experts in the educational science need to do something probably. And the second, digital PO, environmental transition. So just to be sure, your idea was digital transition is automating and destroying jobs in a way. Is the environmental transition that wants to be accompanied by the digital transition, according to the European Commission, able to take those people and bring them back to job? Could be, in a way, there is also always the issue of skill match or mismatch. So I go back here. We have a very rough proxy of negative exposure to the digital transition. So we have routine task intensity and probability of computerization in here. And what we see is that those occupations have a huge, so the ones that are the loser of the digital transition are very distant in terms of skills from green occupations, on average at least. So there is some problem in immediate transition, and to do so, again, there is a need for training. So the transition needs to be accompanied.
Thanks, Joe. Sandro, can I add one short thing, if I may?
Providing there are no questions from other, yes, you can. And if they are not, go ahead.
No, it's a very short clarification, Joe. Have you got any information about the nature of the projects that are funded? For instance, something that you can do an NLP on, something that you can have you got sort of the text of the projects that have been funded?
So in principle, you show at the beginning, no? You show at the beginning a couple of texts.
Yeah, there is a text of the project, like the Solana. Let me search Solana project. We have the text. We also have additional variables that could be used. For example, we know something about the sector where of the prime recipient, 6-digit NICs. We know there are many additional information that we do not use. That could be searched for identifying specific projects or identifying the nature of the project. There is better information. We use a very small portion of it here.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions from the floor? Otherwise, we can somehow move towards a conclusion. I mean, in concluding, I don't know, just some broad consideration on which maybe Giovanni want to reply if you like. First of all, in terms of analytical tools or technical choices that you've taken in this policy evaluation exercises. So our first year student have just taken a course in policy evaluation with Alessandro Palma, who I don't know whether is he still here or not. But to these students in particular, I would say that I was captured by three things that I think are quite important in policy evaluation studies. The first thing is the effort that you made in controlling for expenditure in non-green ARRA. That was an appreciable effort that in other studies, at least to the best of my knowledge, is readily done. Also, the effort of netting out pre-existing trends to the policies is another important thing that the students, I think, should bring home. And also the distinction between the first and subsequent recipients of a policy, I think is quite appreciable. I don't know whether that could be done in each and every context or just in the US, but I think, I don't know, just my idea is that these are the three or at least three important elements of originality of these studies that I think our students could bring home. My first question is, Giovanni, whether you think that these three issues are generally considered, not so much considered around, so, which is the general feeling of other policy evaluation students studies with respect to these 3 points. And the second set of consideration concern the exportability of these results to Europe and the possibility of carrying out similar studies on the next generation EU or similar policy packages. This issue of a delay in the policy effect, I was wondering whether those mechanisms that you propose in interpreting this delay are actually general, and they could extend also in a European context, and we should therefore expect a similar delay also there. And then a similar question concerns the distributional, say, effects of the policy, about which Adelia posed an important question. I'm not so sure whether the fact that ARRA mainly created manual jobs is a good piece of news in distributional terms. Okay, you said these people might not have worked before, but these people have low skills while we are working for people having higher skills. So I'm not so sure whether it's a good piece of news in the conclusion of the paper, and I'm wondering whether these results extend also to a European context. I'm aware that I possibly pose a too broad set of issues. If you want to just to address some of them, and then we can move towards a conclusion. Okay. Thank you, Giovanni. You are muted. You are muted.
Okay, and starting from the second group of questions, that is the exportability to Europe. In terms of delay, some of the problems will be relevant also for us in Europe. So we have, especially in terms of, we see it from the next generation EU, we have many stages of approval. We have the countries developing the project, then the Commission and the Council will need to approve it with majority, but will be a sort of a revision process, etc. So this will take time to start. And once the program will be started, there will be the issue of spending public fund, and we know that many countries, Italy, but not only Italy have problems in between the allocation of fund and the spending of it, the outlay. So this is something to be thought about. While probably we will not experience the issue of Buy American, so we will not have something like Buy European. Europe is a bit more liberist, you know, is in terms of there is imposing much less requirement on trade. Even though in the Green Deal there is something which could be the last chapter of the Green Deal, chapter 4, I think, there is a nuclear bomb in there. It is the use of trade policy for bringing more, exporting the transition somewhere else. That is imposing basically carbon adjustment tariffs or using trade policy strategically for developing products in Europe. So this could be something that could be, on the one hand, important, on the other hand, could be problematic in terms of implementation of the policy. Regarding distribution issues in Europe, probably the biggest problem of the ARRA was that, maybe I'm overselling it, but it posed the basis for the change in administration a few years afterward, because the sentiment was that that kind of huge push went in the pockets of the rich. It was reinforcing the elites and was not benefiting enough the lowest part of the income distribution, that was at the same time hit by the competition from abroad and the digital transition. But this additional effect of federal spending not going in the pockets of the poor was probably felt as something that was not good for this administration, and poor people also decided to, maybe have decided to vote against the Democrats in the 1960s. I'm exaggerating, this is fanta politics, so that's why in Europe probably we learn something from it, and in the Green Deal we explicitly wanted to account for the losers. So we have the Just Transition Fund, which is not huge, it is 100 billion, and was aimed at keeping the losers on board. It is helping regions that that are based on brown sectors, helping individuals that have a lot to lose from the green transition. Going back to the methodological issues you were mentioning, so we were on the one hand, we used a quite simple approach. So we control for everything, and for many things at least, we decided to control for observables. And we realized that the biggest problem that were pretends did not disappear. So we were in a way pragmatic to say, okay, we can't solve the problem, let's deal with the problem and simply remove it. Okay, so we are on the safe side on the one hand, so our results are the lower bound of the expected effect. We decided not to lose too much time to look for instruments, given that the most obvious one did not work and could not work. And we decided for desktop also because in this literature, empirical strategy is usually very, very simple in a way. So all the paper I was mentioning do not use instruments, do not use, they're very simple. Okay, so we opted for a simple framework with many controls, but with a simple framework. Because the a bit more sophisticated approach were either not applicable or applicable to very, very specific problems. So identifying causal effect for a very narrow and specific issue, but losing the broad picture. So we decided to keep the broad picture on board, and I'm sure that Alessandro Palma was clear on that. So many causal tools are perfect, they really give you the precise effect with a very high confidence, but usually at the cost of focusing on small questions. Not always, sometimes.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni. Thank you a lot. Other questions from the floor? Otherwise, I think that we can move towards the conclusion. I'm very happy for having had a lively discussion from PhD students. Giovanni, you stimulated attentions also in them. So this is really a good outcome of the webinar. Having said that, we do thank you a lot, Giovanni, once more for having collaborating to the life of GSSI. You already contributed in several respects. As far as I know, you've been recently in a PhD committee, in a Viva committee. So, I mean, we are involving and counting on you. So we are very grateful to you for that. Having said that, I remind to everybody that our webinar series will continue next Wednesday. We will host Fabiana Vicentin from UNUMERIT, who's gonna talk about what matters in funding research. So once more, we will get back to the issue of funding research, policy evaluation. You might notice that this is really a key issue of the GSSI. So this is something that we care a lot, how policymakers allocate money and how this policy sorts out the facts, okay? So we're gonna continue on that next Wednesday. I hope to see you on Wednesday's number as you were this time. And I wish to Giovanni, first of all, and to everybody, a good continuation of the day. Okay? Thank you very much, guys. Take care.